we should get straight into the recaps. I really am excited to recap these games for you. I hope you can hear me well. Can you hear me, chat? I'm sounding a bit nasally and congested. I'm sorry, I'm just a bit sick, so apologies for my voice in general. Anyway, let's get into some recaps. If you guys don't know, I've been playing a tournament for the past week. It's called the Melbourne International Open, and it is a tournament that they just started running this year, and it has been one of the biggest tournaments that they've had in Australia this year. There's not many big tournaments in Australia. If you're new to the Australian chess world, it's pretty rare. I was very excited to be able to play this without having to travel super far. So this is a 9-round tournament, and they had 2 sections, the major and the open. So the major was for players that were 2000 rated plus, and they actually had a bunch of GMs, IMs, FMs, so a bunch of title players playing in that one. But in the open section, that was people... Well, it was open to anyone, but basically only people that were rated below 2000 entered in that category. It was a 9-round tournament, 2 rounds a day for 4 days, and then 1 round on the final day. And the time control was 90 minutes plus 30 seconds, so classical time control. And in my first round, I was paired against a gentleman by the name of Maurice, who was 1630 FIDE. He hadn't been playing tournaments super regularly. I think his last tournament was around a year ago, so he was sort of playing on and off. Now, I usually won't, say the full name of my opponent unless they want me to, but my opponent's name was Maurice Hennessy. And when I was trying to look up the prep for Maurice, I was trying to look up Maurice Hennessy chess. It did not help that GM Maurice Ashley did a collab with the alcoholic beverage Hennessy a while ago, because all I was finding was like 800 pictures of Maurice Ashley posing with a bottle of Hennessy. So it was actually hard to find preparation for my opponent, but eventually I was able to find a chess.com account and narrowed it down to the fact he either played a French or a Caro-Kann against e4. So anyway, I got to the board for my first round and I was super nervous. I haven't been playing a whole lot of classical chess, so I was really nervous to be playing I was really nervous to be playing in a classical tournament with 2 rounds in a day. And yeah, I just thought I would do my best and try and keep calm. So I started off with e4 and he played c6, and I was immediately really happy because I was like, yes, he's playing a Caro, and I had actually prepared against this already. I mean, I hadn't really prepared more than a few moves, to be honest, because there wasn't much to find about him online, but I did just know that maybe we were going to go on a Caro or a French, and I always like to see the Caro, so I went for knight c3. And he plays d5 here, and I play knight to f3, and this is the 2 knights variation of the Caro. I prefer this a lot to playing, the advanced variation or things like that, because what most of the time happens is we just trade off and I get 2 knights in the center, and I feel like it's nicer to not have this pawn chain on like d4, e5, c3, and then the opponent gets strong counterplay with c5 or f6. So I prefer this because it's kind of flexible and it's nice, and there's also some sharp lines as well. So I was excited to maybe go into some of those. So yeah, I captured back with the knight on e4, and now you'll notice I have 2 knights in the center and my opponent has not moved any pieces yet, so I'm a little bit ahead in development already. My opponent plays knight to f6, which is the main move here. And here I play queen to e2. And this is the main line, but it also has a few tricks with it. Because if your opponent decides they're realizing, oh, she's about to take here, and at the moment I can't take back because the king is pinned, so I'd have to take back with that pawn. Maybe I'll defend. Well, immediately you get to checkmate, and then you end the game after just 6 moves, so that's kind of nice. So guys, remember, if you're playing the Caro-Kann, do not put that piece on d7 if that queen's on e2. You might be in danger. So my opponent, of course, doesn't fall for this trap and does the most principled thing, which is to trade off the knights. And then here, he plays a move, which I was surprised to learn was actually the top engine move. But for some reason, I'd never really looked at it before, which is quite concerning because it is actually one of the most common moves, but I had only really played against knight to d7. I really had never even played against queen d5 before. So I was like, oops. On move 7, I'm already unsure of what's happening in this position. So this seems to be just kind of that he wants to trade off queens, get a simple endgame. I mean, if I take here, then he's probably happy with that, right? Because he gets to capture with one of his flank pawns and now control the center with this pawn here. Yeah, just for some reason I hadn't looked at this. I hadn't looked at this line screws because all I knew about Maurice was that he maybe played c6 and d5. I knew nothing beyond that. In his online games, I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything beyond that because all of his opponents played super weird stuff like f4 and g4 against the carrows. So I was like, not sure. But for some reason, I hadn't looked at this line before, even though it's very, very common. But okay. It's not a very aggressive way to play, so I didn't feel like it was a very troubling move. I just tried to think about it logically. And what I was thinking was, okay, I don't really want to take because that just gives him what he wants and allows him to get some pawns in the center. And I also didn't want to move my queen back because now that the queen's on d5 and I no longer have a knight that can come to c3 and attack the queen can kind of stay in the center. So I didn't really like the look of bringing the queen back. It felt a bit passive. So instead, I decided to come up with a plan to play more aggressively. And I wanted to keep my queen out in the open, but not somewhere where it could easily be attacked. So I decided to put it on f4. And I had also thought about queen h4, but queen f4 I liked because I wanted to put pressure on this pawn. And my plan was to play bishop c4 and then even play knight e5 and knight g5 and attack the f7 pawn. So this is what I played here after a little think. And then my opponent plays quite quickly this move bishop to f5, which is immediately a blunder. So it's cool that my opponent blundered so early in my first game. But initially, I didn't really think it was a blunder. I was like, this is a really annoying move because I wasn't super familiar with the position. I was like, this is a really annoying move. My opponent wants to just trade off queens, go into the endgame, and I'm not going to have any fun. I'm not going to be enjoying this because he's just going to trade off the queens, and then I'm just going to have to play a slow and boring endgame. And my plan of bishop c4, well, he can just take and take. And then at that moment, I was like, oh, wait. I still can actually play bishop c4 because after queen e4 takes and takes, then I can play bishop f7 check, king takes, and then knight g5 is going to be a fork. So then I was like, oh, okay, so that's cool. If he does go for queen e4, then this is going to be a good move. And I also thought after bishop c4, I did try and make sure that I fully thought it through. If the queen moves somewhere else, then I get to just attack the king a lot, put pressure on this bishop here. So for example, if he doesn't want to trade off and plays queen c5 or something like that, we have a move like b4, attacking the queen. And then if the queen takes, we have tactics with bishop f7. So we have lots of fun tactics there if they don't trade. So the best move is actually just to trade. So then this is what happens in the game. So the king actually comes out to g6. And then here I'm just up a pawn already, which I was very happy about because it was so early in the game. I was happy to be already up a pawn. And here he makes a logical move. He plays e6. He obviously wants to develop this dark square bishop, bring this knight out. So he's trying to just free up his position a little bit. So yeah, usually I wouldn't be super, super confident in a position where I'm up a pawn. I would be like, okay, maybe my opponent still has chances to draw. But the other great thing about this position was that this pawn here in the center was really, really weak. So my whole plan could just revolve around attacking this pawn, forcing them to bring all of their pieces to come in and defend this pawn, and then using the fact that they're tied down to defending this pawn to then start with plans of pushing pawns on this side or wherever I want to start pushing. So here, my main plan was to attack this pawn and also to not let him push this pawn forward or push the c5 pawn, basically. So I decided to play d4 because what I wanted to do was control this square and this square, and then also get my bishop out. So yeah, then he goes bishop to e7, developing the bishop, and I castle. I did think about bringing the bishop out, but I thought it'd be nice to castle first and then bring my rook to the e-file and attack the pawn. He played knight to d7, and then I played bishop f4. You know, I do want to note that it does kind of look like this is possible. A fork on these two pieces, so that's something you have to be a little worried about, because initially when I was looking at this move, I was like, oh no, he has king f5, but thankfully here I have bishop d6. So either the king is going to take here, and then of course if they take there, I would have rook to d1, so he can't actually win the pawn back, and then if they take this instead, I would have check and also attacking this pawn. Although I couldn't really take, because he starts to get in like this, but it wasn't a problem. So he instead plays rook to f8, attacking my bishop, and I move back to g3. Engine recommends that I just trade off the bishops right away. I was kind of just wanting to keep my bishop on the board for now. I didn't really want to go crazy with trading a lot of pieces, so I decided to just keep the piece on. Now he goes knight to f6, and I play rook to e1. Yeah, it is good, but sometimes you can get a little trade happy and then your opponent finds a way to draw. So I just wanted to try and keep the pressure on the pawn and not just trade off everything too fast. Because sometimes it's easier to defend when there's less pieces on the board. And in the end, I felt like my bishop did a good job of keeping some pressure on these squares. But yeah, it was probably better to just trade off. So yeah, here I didn't want to just take, because I thought maybe after g takes f6, then at least his pawn isn't isolated anymore. I mean, it's still pretty terrible, but maybe he gets the chance to push now. So instead I decide to play rook e1, and then if they take, then I'm going to be able to take with the rook and double up easily. Welcome in, Omar, good to see you. Okay, so I play rook e1 now. And then he plays rook to e8, just having a little bit of defense down this e-file in the center, because I'm trying to attack him there. I decide to trade, and then I play c3, connecting the pawns. He goes rook to d8. I did, at a few points, I think my opponent should have maybe tried to go for another pawn sacrifice for c5 to try and chip up the pawns to get his rook in, but he never really went for that. King defends the pawn with f5, which actually makes sense. It kind of looks like a crazy move, but it did actually make sense to defend this over here. I double up the rooks to attack the pawn, and then he plays h4. So he's planning to try and get some counterplay by pushing over here. Unfortunately, there's just not a lot that my opponent can really do, so he's just attacking with the pawns over on the king side. I play at h3 just so that if necessary I can tuck my bishop back here. It probably wasn't really a necessary move because I can always go bishop to e5. Like if they start pushing pawns, I can just go bishop to e5 and trade. But anyway, my opponent plays g5, and then here I decide to play bishop to e5 and offer the trade of the bishops, get my bishop up into the center, and offer for the bishops to come up. And here he trades, I take, and the king goes to f6. And here I find a nice way to sort of make the game end a bit faster. And here I play h4. I was trying to decide between f4 and h4, but I thought it was kind of similar. I decided on h4 in the end. So the idea is obviously that if they push, that just hangs a pawn. And if they take, what happens now, this pawn is isolated over here. So it's a lot harder to defend this. After a while, I can just put all the pressure. And the idea was to bring in the king to attack the pawn and then win a second pawn. And then if I'm trading everything down, 2 pawns up in the endgame is pretty much all over. And of course, if they, you know, try and bring their rook to defend over here, this pawn is going to hang. And if they just ignore the threat, well, I'm going to take on g5. So it did pretty much force him to capture over here. And then I had a lot of time. My opponent maybe had around 15, 20 minutes, whereas I still had an hour just because it was a really, I don't know, it was hard for my opponent to play, but it was relatively simple for me. I think I played a little too fast, but it was it was just the position was quite simple. He played rook to h8, wanting to trade off rooks, and then I brought my rook up to e5. And then the idea is if they take, I can take back, attacking the pawn again on h4. And then he plays rook to g8, hoping maybe to bring his rook into g4 and defend the pawn somehow, or just get the rook a bit more active. I now bring my king up to h2, ready to attack this pawn over here. He takes, I take, and then he plays rook to g4. And yeah, here I decide to just play a move that will stop his rook from infiltrating, because I think that maybe the only way that he could have sort of got back into the game is that maybe if this rook infiltrated on the second rank and started taking pawns. So here I just played f3, and this stops the rook from coming in. This stops the rook from coming into e4. So I was really happy with this move also, because now my king is going to be able to come up to h3, and then I'm also going to be taking this pawn here. And my opponent actually resigned here. It maybe seems a little bit early, but I will be winning a second pawn in this game, and I think my opponent was also now going below 10 minutes on the clock and probably didn't want to try and defend an endgame down 2 pawns for, you know, for the rest of the day. So that is the first game. I won. And my opponent was very nice. We analyzed a little bit. We talked about it. And yeah, I guess the critical mistake was this bishop f5 move. I saw that it's only been played once at the master level. And yeah, it again fell to this tactic. So yeah, I was happy that this game could be ended nice and quickly, and then I could get some rest before my next round. Because the first game was at 9:30 a.m. and then the second game was at 3 p.m. So I think I finished this game around 11:30 a.m. or something like that. So I had plenty of time before the next round just to chill and relax. So yeah, that was game number 1. So yeah, the second game for the day for the Melbourne International Open started at 3 p.m. And I was playing against a 1700 rated player with the black pieces. Yes, this was against the mighty Daniel Zhang. Now, my opponent was a little bit scared to be playing me. He was begging me at the board to please switch places with one of the other people so that he wouldn't have to play me. And maybe I was already in his head at that point, because I think maybe he was a bit tired maybe from the first game and didn't play as well as usual, but overall it was a fun game. All right, so I'm going to show you guys this one here. So I had the black pieces. I don't think I played amazingly well, but it was definitely a fun game. So I got a Sicilian, which always makes me happy. I love playing the Sicilian. Anytime I get a Sicilian on the board, I'm happy as Larry. We have knight to f3 and d6, just controlling some of these dark squares in the middle of the board. And then opponent plays d4, and we're going to trade the pawns in the center. I now go knight to f6, attacking this pawn on e4, and he plays knight c3 to defend. And then I play a6, which is the knight off. And I've been revising a lot of my Anish Giri knight off course in the past couple of weeks, so I was happy to maybe get some of those lines on the board today. I saw in his online games that he plays the bishop g5 variation, and I was wondering maybe I would either go into Anish's version or even, you know, try out my Polygaevsky over the board, but unfortunately, he played something different. He played bishop to e2 instead. And this is a little bit more of a... It's not an as aggressive way to play, but it's still definitely a way to play. So I just play e5, pushing in the center, because that's what you want to do with the knight off. You want to push this knight away from the middle of the board, but you don't want it to come over here to b5, so a6 is a really important move to include. And usually where the knight goes is really going to tell you where your opponent is going to castle. You can tell a lot about what is going to happen in the game based on where this knight goes. Now, if it's going over here, your opponent is usually planning to castle queenside and have this knight controlling all these squares over here and then trying to attack you like this. If the knight goes back to f3, usually they're planning to play a little bit more of a chill game and castle on the king side. And now, of course, in this in this situation, the knight can't go to e2, but there are some lines where the knight does go to e2, and that means they're planning to push f4. So you can tell a lot about what your opponent is planning to do. I developed my bishop out to e6. This kind of is where the bishop wants to go, especially after you played e5. You can just slot that little bishop in there, control it as squares in the center, and gain a little bit of control over d5. And then he plays bishop to e3. So yeah, this is sort of a... When he played bishop to e3, I guess that he kind of wants to play it like an English attack, but the bishop's already on e2, which isn't the most normal way to play it. Usually when somebody's playing the English attack, the bishop is still on f1, and they're playing queen d2, f3, g4, pushing all their pawns over here, and then the bishop is maybe going to come out later, but it's usually not coming straight to e2. I played knight to d7 here, and then he played f3. I played bishop e7, bringing my dark square bishop out. He played queen to d2, and then I played queen c7, and then this rook is going to come over here. So yeah, the queen is going to come out to 7, and this sort of prepares you to start pushing forward with b5 and b4, start attacking over on this side of the board, and especially since I know it looks like my opponent is about to castle queenside here, I want to start attacking them down the c-file. So that's my plan. So here I play rook to c8, developing the rook and also attacking the king. So this is now feeling like a nice position for me, because it's sort of like we got an English attack position, but because bishop e2 is being played, it's almost like white's a move behind, because usually bishop e2 is not really the most necessary move, I guess. I'm sure this is still a good way to play for white, I guess, but it feels like I'm happy. I have the initiative, maybe. He plays king to b1, and this is pretty common to play when you're playing with the white pieces against the Sicilian like this, because I'm trying to attack you down on this square, and you would just want to make sure that your king is a little bit out of the straight line of attack. And then I play b5, planning to start pushing forward. Now I've left castling to quite late, but I just really... This is maybe one of my problems where I don't want to castle, I just want to attack. But it's okay, for now I'm playing well. Then he plays rook to c1 here, which I thought was kind of a strange move. I guess maybe he was a bit worried about after b4 if c2 was going to come under a lot of pressure. But I think it seems a little strange to put this rook on c1, because the rook's happy attacking down the d-file, right? And c2 isn't under a lot of pressure at the moment. I mean, the bishop can even come to d3 if it needs to defend. Yeah, we got the triple fast lane attack, exactly. So yeah, when the rook came back to c1, I was like, maybe something's going a little wrong here. I decided to play knight to b6 here. And my plan now is to play d5. I was almost ready to push in the center, play d5, and break everything open and start attacking them down here. So this was another plan behind this move. This knight either wants to come to c4, attacking these pieces, but mostly it also wants to control the push here for d5. He played knight to a5. I'm not exactly sure what the plan with knight to a5 was, to be honest. I was considering a move like b4, trying to attack this knight, but I thought that after this, maybe b4 would come under attack, but now I realize that stuff like d5 and this is defended, so maybe I could have tried that. Instead I played castles, which was probably... I think I was just like, well, I haven't castled and it's move 14, so I want to play d5, right? I want to start... want to start pushing the center, but it feels a bit scary to open up the center when my king is still in the middle of the board. Like, maybe my opponent can, you know, sack and open everything up. So I was too scared to start pushing all my pawns in the center when I hadn't castled. So that's why I played castles here. And, you know, I can't really play d5 just yet because he can take this knight over here and then capture on d5, and then... So d5 isn't achieving much yet. So I decided to just castle first. Wouldn't knight c4 be a free knight? For who? The knight can take back. So I don't think so. Okay, here he plays a3. And this, again, I thought was a little strange because it creates a bit of a target for me. And, you know, in the future, if I'm getting to play b4, it just becomes a lot easier to start opening up the position when a3 is played, because I can start attacking this pawn a lot easier. And yeah, apparently now d5 is strong. I still thought that after takes, that I wasn't really sure about this. I thought this position probably looks good, but I'm not really winning any material. In fact, white is up material, so that's why I didn't play d5. So Engine feels upset with me that I didn't play d5. That's why I didn't play it. I instead played rook to d8 to try and prepare. Yes, rook d8 is very strong at the end of that. I just was like, is that really winning for me? Because when I was down a pawn, I was like, is that actually really going to be winning for me? So instead, I decided to play rook d8 just to try and push forward and play d5. So here he brings his rook into d1. I mean, really, this knight should be captured because it's really strong. And then here, I finally play d5, pushing in the center of the board. And he captures. I now takes, and takes. I'm attacking this bishop, and I've got a lot of pressure down this file where the queen is, and the rook is also. And then he has to move this knight back. So he moves the knight back to b3 to try and defend things, hold on to the position. And then I realize I can just take a pawn here. Now, this isn't the best move, but it is just a free pawn, essentially. Because after takes, I have knight f6. And that would win the queen. So I was like, okay, if I can just take a pawn here, I'm pretty happy. And like, he can't take back because I'm going to be winning the queen. So I decided to take. Yes, b4 would have been a really strong move. Yeah, instead of b4. That was a move I was also considering. It was a little bit trickier to calculate for me, this kind of move. But it looks very, very good, definitely looking back on it. I guess bishop a6 is nothing to worry about because rook a8. And after bishop d3, we just take over here. And that would be super overwhelming for my opponent. But yeah, instead I decided to just grab the pawn. He plays c4 here, attacking me. So then I decided to move this bishop back to b4. This wasn't the most accurate way to play, but it was still winning. I mean, it gets a little confusing after takes and takes and takes and takes and takes, and then bishop takes, and I'm up a pawn in the endgame, and I also have the bishop pair, but it does get a little confusing. So I think that maybe I should have done something instead of bishop b4. Like, to just take is better. And you can't really take here because there's just going to be a lot of pressure. Down this diagonal, you're probably going down this file and you're going to lose this knight. But yeah, it got really confusing for me, so I decided to just attack the queen and then hope we could go into something a bit more simple. Now, of course, he probably should just take if he wants to keep the game going, but instead he plays queen to d3. Thank you so much, Majestic, for the 5 gifted subs. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope you're doing well, Majestic. It is good to see you. Instead, he plays queen to d3, which does just pretty much end the game instantly because I have knight c3 now, which is check. And we're also attacking the queen at the same time. Rook takes, I take here. And this is just a horrible position, really, where nothing is really working because this is hanging. And if this rook captures over here, I can now play something like bishop f5. I'm also threatening a fork over here, so I can take here with a fork on the 2 pieces. Bishop f5 is also a threat, pinning the rook to the king. So it's almost like everything is just lining up very well here. So I take, bishop takes, and then I just grab the rook. And then after here, my opponent resigns. Because if you take back this pawn here, I'm going to take here and fork the bishop and the knight, and yeah, then you're losing a lot of material, so it doesn't feel like that's really worth playing on anymore. But yeah, so that was my first 2 games of my tournament.